Midnight in Eridu, 3500 BC. The world holds its breath beneath the thick summer dusk. Along the Euphrates, Sumer's oldest city lounges in sleep, crowned by the rectangular shadow of its first low ziggurat, built from 1,000,000 sun-cured bricks. Fishermen's reed boats, empty and tethered, bob near shattered torches on the riverbank, while the temple's night priest sweeps the last embers from a copper brazier. Here, with the gentle hush of wind and the metallic scent of silted water, myths pass like old songs, none more powerful or persistent than those of the Anunnaki. High above, the stars begin their slow march across the Mesopotamian vault. For the Sumerians, snug beneath their reed and mud rooftops, the Anunnaki are present in every rustle and shadow. Each lowing ox or quivering willow is believed to answer to invisible hands. These are the great gods, the divine ancestors who once walked among reeds and mountains and now rule the destinies of men and cities from their silent domain. Priests sense them in the flicker of lizard tails, the swirl of updrafts. Even the city walls seem to breathe with their presence when moonlight rakes the baked clay. Chalk on damp stone, the cuneiform scribes mark chronicles and omens, hoping to preserve scraps of this sacred inheritance. The Anunnaki, their names uncertain and shifting with dialect and dynasty, are whispered first in prayer as children learn to speak. By 3500 BC, their legacy is already ancient, the backbone of Sumerian faiths carved into the minds of the living. 1,000 temple hymns carry their memory, twining like marsh grass through the city's corridors, repeated by generations who never doubt their power. As the lip of night advances over canals and apricot groves, Eridu's silence foreshadows centuries of glory and collapse. On this midnight, soft, vast, and gaslit by the Pleiades above, the story of the Anunnaki glimmers quietly, offering not just fear and guidance, but also the comfort of inherited mystery. Their myth will haunt and shape the rulers and laborers who slumber here, untouched by tomorrow's dust storms or invading armies. The torch passes, unseen, in the restful cradle of old Sumer, as ever under the watch of the undying gods. Beneath the pale starlight of prehistoric Sumer, before cuneiform scratched order into chaos, the story of the Anunnaki begins not in palaces, but between the shadows of campfires. These were the days before memory had text, when myth kept the wild night at bay. Elders, ringed with children in reed-walled courtyards, quietly told of the Anunnaki, primordial beings older than the first tilling of grain, wreathed in mist and darkness. In their earliest shapes, the Anunnaki were not yet the multi-named gods of the clay tablets. They emerged instead from the formless stuff of the world, damp, endless night, and swirling, fathomless waters. It was a landscape without laws or kings, where every hill and every whirlpool hinted at invisible presences. Here the Anunnaki reigned, not as familiar human-shaped figures, but as vast, dreamlike forces. They were the water beneath the earth, the ancestor light of the unreachable stars, and the thunder hidden in black sky. The only markers were natural: standing stones, the crash of the river at flood, the shock of a lightning strike splitting a lonely tamarisk tree. Each anomaly, every uncanny gust or firefly swarm, was blamed or blessed on the old gods, the mysterious Anunnaki who had not yet taken temples or idols. Around 4000 BC, a subtle shift began as nomad bands built permanent villages and clusters of huts. Myth tugged itself toward order. Yet within each tale, the Anunnaki kept their primal ambiguity. These were beings who could not be drawn or bargained with in the ordinary way. They represented both blessing and undoing, the pulse of everything unpredictable. With every harvest and each funeral, their names gained clarity, but never edges. They were parents of the unknown, always just beyond the edge of firelight. Even as kin groups merged and the first proper towns rose among irrigated fields, the Anunnaki remained mostly rumor, spoken aloud to warn, to hope, to remember what lay beneath the visible world. Their place in the mythic order was set. Before gods had children, before city gates swung shut, the Anunnaki were invoked in awe and fear. These shadowy figures seeded the promise that every sunrise, every lover's embrace, and every warlike cry was woven through with the intentions of the world's original architects. The myth, long before it carried names and crises, simply wandered wherever the night was deepest. Uruk, c. 3200 BC, the city hums as day breaks over broad wheat fields and fresh-cut canals. In public squares and high temple courts, priests lift their voices to the ancestors of the gods, chanting of Anu and Kai. Anu, the unblinking skyfather, reigns in the celestial expanse. Kai, the nurturing earth mother, undergirds every palm and rush. Here, the sacred marriage between sky and earth anchors a mythology soon to dominate the river valleys. Their union, as told on seals and in ritual songs, breeds consequence. It births a formidable line of deities whose powers govern nature and history. Carved reliefs from this era show Anu enthroned, horned crown ablaze, with Ki wrapped beneath him like fertile soil under the sun. Temples strive to mirror this heavenly order through their architecture. Enormous terraced platforms that bridge earth and sky, offering a stage for human and divine interaction. For the Sumerians, every early New Year, the time of flood and promise, the ritual dramatization of Anu and Ki's marriage is staged. Priests and sometimes kings take on the divine roles, enacting a cosmic wedding meant to ensure a year of plenty. These ceremonies, conducted in torchlit sanctuaries, blend fertility, kingship, and prophecy. The people believe that if their rites echo the sacred marriage, their fields will burst with barley, their children with laughter, and their armies with courage. By binding Anu and Ki in eternal embrace, the Sumerian mythmakers imprint a template for generations. Every god to follow will trace lineage to this first fateful coupling. Tablets stacked in Uruk's temple storehouses recount the details, each line pressed by stylus into wet clay, each story strengthening the notion that sky and earth are never truly apart. The sacred marriage establishes not only a genealogy, but a promise to all Sumer. As long as heaven and earth reunite, life will persist in the dust and glory of the plain. Dawn sweeps over the lower Tigris, c. 3150 BC, and the world swiftly populates with divine beings. Born to Anu and Ki are the chief children of heaven, Enlil, Enki, and Ninhursag. Each possesses dominion over different elements of creation. Enlil is the wild winds master, Enki the god of crafts and sweet water, and Ninhursag the gentle mother, bestower of birth and lush abundance. Their figures soon become the scaffolding for Sumerian religion, transforming the shapeless fears of earlier ages into a comprehensible, almost familial order. Enlil, often depicted with commanding posture and horned headdress, is the one who parts sky from earth. At his word, city walls rise and empires fall. When winds howl and sand scours the fields, Sumerians know Enlil is stirring. His principal shrine, the Ekur at Nippur, soon becomes the spiritual capital of the land, a gathering place for priests, couriers, and kings, all brought together beneath his unseen gaze. By the late 3rd millennium BC, visitors to Nippur number in the thousands, bearing grain, bulls, and lapis lazuli as tribute. Enki of Eridu's, more subtle yet no less powerful, governs waterways, canals, and the quicksilver workings of invention. Stories passed from fisherman to scribe credit him with saving the world repeatedly, whether by crafting humanity from clay or deciphering the knots of fate knotted by the less clever gods. His temple, the Iabzu, is built above a sacred pool said to tap the world's deep, sweet waters, a place where oracles draw dreams under flickering oil lamps. Ninhursag, meanwhile, strides the marshes, her presence felt in every newborn calf and field of vetch. She is midwife to gods and mortals alike, and is honored at sanctuaries raised on green islands among the shallows. When women labor, when flocks multiply, it's to Ninhursag prayers rise at sunrise and dusk. Together, these children of Anu unleash a dynamic world, where wind, water, and soil contend, combine, and enrich one another. Their rivalries and alliances, played out in tale and ritual, flavor the entire sweep of Sumerian existence. From family farms to palace storerooms, Sumer's people believe themselves watched and shaped by these powerful offspring, their destinies mixed on the wheel of divine kinship. Sunrise over Eridu, Siu 2900 BC, and the city's ziggurat looms against the orange haze, a stepped sentinel above irrigated plain. Each tier of mud brick represents decades of labor and thousands of offerings. As the first civilizations coalesce, these temples stand not just as civic centers, but as cosmic footholds for the Anunnaki. Every brick stamped with a god's name whispers the enduring bond between heaven and earth, a visible promise that the gods above attend to the world below. Within the ziggurat precincts, rituals unfold with clockwork precision. Priests in linen robes wind between shrines, tending votive flames and anointing statues with sesame oil, while the head priest chants the ancient names Enlil, Enki, Ninhursag. The sacred architecture itself is a myth, designed to ascend the worshipper from dusty silt to the sky's pure wind. At Nippur, 180 miles northeast of Eridu, the Ekor Ziggurat rises nearly 30 meters, its bricks stamped by kings and priests who worked in rhythm with the seasons and the stars. The Anunnaki, invoked in every festival and ritual meal, are believed to inhabit the very crowns of these rising man-made mountains. Scribes record lists of divine episodes, how the gods descended to accept offerings, how lightning played at their feet on stormy nights, how the grain stored in the temple's vaults ensured survival after lean harvests. Dedicatory texts from Nippur, etched onto limestone and dated to 2400 BC, describe processions of 400 people, bearing loads of barley and honey to honor the unseen overlords. By late afternoon, the temples radiate heat, their walls blistering under the southern sun. Yet crowds bustle in their courtyards, hoping a glance, a grain, or a word offered in the right shadow will win an ounce of favor. The ziggurats, visible for miles, anchor both city and cosmos. They promise the Anunnaki's gaze endures through sandstorms, droughts, and invaders' threats. As dusk returns, torchlight flickers up the steps, and the mighty gods seem to breathe, watching the world through the eyes of brick and prayer. Nippur, c. 2500 BC, pulses with the solemn rhythm of justice as the Anunnaki are invoked over tablets of destiny. To the Sumerians, these gods are not distant dreamers. They are arbiters steeling themselves behind golden scales, the keepers of right and wrong. The tablets of destiny, a mythical set of cuneiform boards, are said to hang in Enlil's shrine. Whoever possesses them, it is believed, rules not just their own fate, but the cycles of the cosmos itself. In the palace courtyard, low tables are stacked with contracts, wills, and legal codes, each made sacred by the witness of invisible deities. Kings stride forth beneath banners wet with recent rain, hoping for a sign in the way the river swells or clouds curl at dusk. The priests of Nippur, acting as envoys, send ritual appeals to the Anunnaki for justice in matters both grand and petty. From border disputes between city-states to the theft of a single goat from a tenant farmer, even executions, rare but public, are cast as divine verdicts. A ceremonial dagger, gleaming beneath the bronze of an early morning sun, becomes the hand of the Anunnaki when brought down onto a mound of wet clay, mirroring in blood the stakes written into their tablets. By mid-3rd millennium BC, archives record upwards of 300 disputes settled in the shadow of Nippur's temple alone, proof of the gods' role as ultimate judges. Appeals echo across the land, turned into cuneiform prayers pressed onto the moist slabs and stored in deep, dark temple vaults. The Sumerian belief in the Anunnaki's cosmic justice never wavers. Even foreign merchants and visiting dignitaries pay respects, leaving small heaps of valuable tin or lapis. These acts are meant to sway the unwritten balance, to earn brief respite or fortune in campaign, harvest, or childbirth. Evening falls and torches cast long shadows across the courtyard. As priests extinguish the last flames, it's said the gods weigh the misdeeds and merits of mortals in that perfect, undying silence. The tablets of destiny rest, untouched but relentlessly binding, in the hands of those who craft the world's laws with mythic authority. Late evening, c. 2450 BC. The clamor of Sumer has not yet subsided when a different story transpires among the gods themselves. In the dim-lit precincts of Eridu, elders whisper of the Igigi, the lesser gods, who have grown restless beneath the heavy yoke of unending toil. Charged by the Anunnaki with the thankless labor of digging canals, raising city walls, and maintaining cosmic order, the Igigi eventually rebel after thousands of years, their patience spent like water on sun-blasted fields. Stone seals and battered tablets from Lagash and Ur carry images of this revolt. Celestial beings, their faces set with determination, abandoning their picks and baskets under the cover of darkness. The myth describes how the Igigi, numbering 600 by some counts, storm the gates of Enlil's house in a fit of exhaustion and complaint. For the mortals awakening to this tale, the story rings sharply true. After all, their own hands have crowded the ditches and brickyards for as long as anyone remembers. Confronted with divine mutiny, the Anunnaki convene in their shadowy council, faces flickering behind clouds of incense and fear. The solution they forge will remake creation's order. If the lesser gods cannot bear the burden, a new being must be fashioned, one sturdy yet pliant, destined to shoulder the world's work. In the myth, the air crackles with the weight of this decision, echoing across Sumer's broad fields and narrow alleys alike. By early autumn, as harvests are tallied and debts inscribed on tablets, the Anunnaki's verdict has already become common knowledge. The rebellion of the Igigi not only justifies humanity's sweat and sorrow, it grants each laborer a kinship with both gods and rebels. So, beneath Sumer's golden harvest moon, every furrow and channel is plowed with new purpose. The fields of men now inherit the toil of immortality, while above, the Anunnaki seal their destiny with the quiet certainty of myth. Eridu, c. 2400 BC, dawns with anxious anticipation as priests ready their ritual space at the edge of the temple precinct. In the earliest Sumerian creation epic, it is here that Enki, wise lord of water and craft, and Ninhursag, goddess of birth, gather to solve the Igigi crisis. Clay scraped from sacred riverbanks is heaped beside the potter's wheel. A vessel of fresh god's blood stands ready, brimming with trembling potential. The air vibrates with curiosity. What will these divine artisans bring into being? The myth unfurls as priests recite the instructions. careful, rhythmic syllables pressed into the minds of outermost listeners. Ninhursag kneads the sticky clay, mingling it with the divine essence drawn from a minor god sacrificed in secret. Spun on a palm-wood wheel, the mixture is shaped into small, tactile forms, each figure molded with round eyes, bent limbs, and chest marked with incised lines. It is a process equal parts violence and tenderness. The first humans are sculpted to be sturdy, obedient, and perpetually aware of their divine origin. Temple accounts from this period, pressed into cuneiform and baked hard to outlast floods, describe subsequent rituals performed for the clay-born workers. The priests sprinkle the figures with holy water drawn from the Abzu, Enki's fabled subterranean freshwater reservoir. A new calendar festival marks this origin each year, with hundreds gathering to see the weaving of clay dolls as children sing ancestral songs. By the close of the 3rd millennium BC, similar rites occur in Lagash and Ur, tying each city's labor force back to the mythic potter's wheel and the scarlet thread of the gods. The echo of this creation story shapes attitudes daily. Farmhands croon songs down the rows, invoking Enki's name whenever mud cakes their hands or sweat glosses their brows. At dusk, children tuck clay figurines beneath woven mats, as if by seeing themselves in the ancient myth, they might inherit some of the dignity and endurance woven by Ninhursag's skillful fingers. This gentle, earthy ritual, rooted in both pain and miracle, ensures that every person, no matter how weary, knows themselves to be both tool and child of the Anunnaki. Sumer. c. 2200 BC, the skies churn with bruised clouds, and the threat of a flood hangs over city walls. Streets once filled with the laughter of merchants and the plod of donkeys now echo with prayers and dread. For generations, the myth of the Great Flood has warned of a divine reckoning, when the Anunnaki, displeased by human noise and excess, choose to erase civilization with a torrent. As rivers crest their banks, the wind carries the panic of the entire land through groves, canals, and the frightened hearts of its people. Tablets from Shuruppak and Nippur recount the details. Enlil, chief of the Anunnaki, decides to exterminate humanity, whose clamor disturbs his divine sleep. Only a few are spared through covert intervention. Enki, compassionate and clever, whispers warnings to a select mortal, providing the plan for a great bark. Mud brick houses collapse beneath a wall of rushing water. Livestock are swept from their pens, and temples once fat with barley offerings drown beneath the deluge. The flood's chaos is so complete that for days, not even mountain peaks break the endless gray of churned water. When the storm at last relents, survivors are few, just enough to continue the line of humankind and uphold frail, battered temples. Myth buries real trauma here. Archaeological records from Kish and Ur show stark flood layers, as much as 2 meters thick, pressing into the strata around 2100–2000 BC. It is possible that the terror of one or more epic river floods was transformed, in collective memory, into the cosmic anger of Enlil and his kin. Yet the Anunnaki are not without mercy. Their rage ends, and life is allowed another fragile beginning. By the first new harvest, survivors have already begun reciting stories of the deluge, reconstructing rituals and refurbishing ruined shrines beneath a sky eerily familiar but forever changed. The myth of the flood, woven into the very foundation of Sumer's epic tradition, warns future generations to heed the will of the Anunnaki, those powerful arbiters who can destroy with water as easily as they create with clay. In the land of dust and glory, the mark of the flood lingers, always threatening, always shaping, never forgotten. Shuruppak, c. 2100 BC, Amid the ruins left by mud and memory, the tale of Utnapishtim emerges as a solemn comfort. Here, on cuneiform tablets buried deep within palace storehouses, scribes immortalize the story of the world's lone survivor. Utnapishtim, favored by Enki and warned in the shadowy depths of the god's temple, is told to construct a colossal bark before the floods come. The boat itself, a pitch-sealed cube measuring 120 cubits on a side according to legend, becomes the vessel not only of animals and seeds, but the new blueprint for mankind's survival. As torrential rains lash the plain, the bark lurches afloat, lifting Utnapishtim, his family, and a pair of every livestock above the chaos engulfing Sumer's cities. Tablets from the library at Nineveh, inscribed 6 centuries later in Akkadian, record the terror and awe. Even the gods cowered at the flood. For 7 days and nights, the deluge rages. Even mountain peaks vanish beneath the foam as the old world is erased. Only when a swallow returns without finding land does Utnapishtim risk opening the hatch, beholding a new, barren earth under alien sunlight. The aftermath is almost as significant as the survival itself. The gods, having witnessed the scale of their own destruction, regret the devastation and grant Utnapishtim and his wife immortality, a reward echoing through future epics. This story, pressed into tablets in the city's rebuilt scribal schools, is retold from Sumer to Babylon, shaping not just rites of mourning and rebirth, but the very concept of mercy in divine judgment. In the flicker of lamplight, as generations gather to hear the recitation, Utnapishtim's story becomes a symbol of hope and resilience, the living reminder that even in the teeth of annihilation, the favor of the Anunnaki can snatch a soul from ruin. The tale endures as a whispered prayer against future floods, a lesson inscribed in both mud and myth. Through all the cycles of disaster and renewal, Utnapishtim sails quietly forward, carrying humanity's faith with every retelling and every sunrise over the silent rivers. Akkad, 2334 BC, sunrise over a horizon bristling with city spires and fields of wind-bent barley. Sumer's city-states, Uruk, Lagash, still echo with hymns to the Anunnaki, but now armies march beneath banners marked with hybrid gods, carrying the stories north toward Akkadian power. The city of Nippur pulses as the religious hub, drawing priests from across the plain. Yet, in Akkad, a new breed of ruler is rising, one who seeks to claim the favor and, increasingly, the lineage of the ancient gods themselves. Sargon's arrival marks a pivotal shift. Founder of the world's first true empire, he claims the Anunnaki's blessing and even hints at descent from divine blood, turning his court into both warrior camp and sacred precinct. Population in Akkad swells toward 50,000. Urban planners draft canals and sanctuaries, while the new king dispatches Omens watchers to every major temple. In the palace of Igigi, officials meet beneath star charts and clay models, charting the will of the Anunnaki by studying celestial signs and the intricate patterns traced in a ram's liver. The city-states hold fast to their age-old rituals. Priests still rise before dawn to burn incense and read the day's coming fortune in sheep, birds, and dreams. The great festivals, Akitu in Babylon, New Year rites in Uruk, anchor city calendars, requiring tons of barley and mountains of fresh dates yearly for feasts meant to please the Anunnaki and keep divine order intact. Archives record deliveries, 1,200 jars of beer, 400 sacrificial bulls, all rendered to the gods as both sign of loyalty and shield against misfortune. Yet empire changes the way people interact with the gods. Sargon and his heirs transmute the old city-based devotion into something more imperial, exalting state temples, importing Sumerian myths to distant provinces, and even mixing Anunnaki stories with new Akkadian deities. Omens continue to guide the fates of kings, armies, and harvests, but also reflect a world now linked by conquest and trade. Beneath the wheeling stars, the Anunnaki endure as ever-watchful arbiters, not just of city destinies, but of an entire region's fate, reshaped in every generation. By war, prophecy, and human ambition. C. 1754 BC, the scent of olive smoke and fresh-cut cedar fills the high-ceilinged court as the king stands before a massive black stele. Carved in relief at its crown is the image of Shamash, god of the sun and justice, but the Anunnaki, those original lawbringers, hover in every line of the law code below. Here, the roots of political authority entwine with ancient myth. Laws are no simple rulings, but sacred decrees drafted by divine hand and made binding in the world of men. From the reforms of Urukagina, who ruled in Lagash Sea 2350 BC, to the much later codification under Hammurabi, legitimacy is drawn like water from the well of the Anunnaki's will. In city after city, legal codes are pressed into wet clay in cuneiform script, then dried to stone-hard permanence. Hammurabi's legendary code, 281 laws in all, claims as its very first lines that it is written at the command of the Anunnaki and enforced under their unblinking oversight. In practical terms, these laws cover everything from the price of labor and the handling of property disputes to the punishment for theft or assault. In a commerce-rich kingdom like Babylon, where the population surges well above 150,000, daily transactions depend on the idea that every contract bears witness to cosmic order. Ceremonial tablets, cast in the deep blue glaze of lapis lazuli or the luminous sheen of alabaster, depict kings receiving scepters from the seated deities. Public steles, sometimes weighing over 4 tons, are mounted at city gates or in temple courtyards, where all can see that mortal law has its source in the immutable justice of the Anunnaki. Royal scribes tally disputes. In Ur's archives alone, over 700 cases are recorded each season, showing a world in which myth and regulation flow together. Through all these records runs an inescapable message. Society is a fragile harmony sustained by law, but law itself, written, invoked, and enforced, is the breath of the gods made solid. As dusk settles over city rooftops, priests recite the old formulas, invoking the Anunnaki before each verdict. In the hushed chambers of power and the crowded bazaars alike, divine justice remains the unbroken thread binding Sumer, Akkad, and Babylon to the memory and will of their ancient creators. Babylon. C. 1700s to BC. Sunrise gilds the city's massive walls and paints the Ishtar Gate with dazzling blues and golds. Here, in the heart of a mighty new capital, the balance of divine power begins to shift. Once, the Anunnaki held exclusive rule from their ancestral thrones, but now a young, ambitious god named Marduk surges to prominence. Crowned by priests and kings alike, Marduk's ascendancy signals a seismic change in the ancient hierarchy. Tablets unearthed from Babylon's temple quarter document the transition. In the Enuma Elish, composed for the city's Spring New Year festival, Marduk is declared king of the gods after he triumphs over the chaos dragon Tiamat, a narrative that recasts him as the architect of cosmos and order. The Anunnaki, once supreme, adjust their ranks. Many are now relegated to honorable service beneath Babylon's rising star. As the capital population crests near 200,000, Marduk receives offerings previously reserved for Enlil or Anu, and his name is invoked at coronations and treaties as the new font of legitimacy. Babylon's Ishtar Gate itself, commissioned by Nebuchadnezzar VII centuries later, but echoing these mythic origins, stands over 50 feet high, covered with glazed bricks molded into dragons and bulls that symbolize the city's divine protectors, old and new. Festive processions, with hundreds of priests, musicians, and citizens, snake through its courts each spring, uniting the city behind Marduk's cult. The cosmic order is visibly rewritten. Gods merge, split, or vanish as the myth adapts to the needs of power. Yet in every festival chant or carved inscription, the memory of the Anunnaki persists. The old gods, while slipping from supreme power, retain their presence as ancestors, advisors, and judges. As empires rise and fall, the adaptability of the gods mirrors the resilience of the cities themselves. Babylon's glory does not erase the Anunnaki. Rather, it absorbs and transforms their legend, ensuring that even as the world is remade, the ancient myth remains alive in new forms. Nippur, c. 1600 BC. The temple courtyards bustle from before dawn as workers and priests prepare for the day's main rituals. Massive ovens heat up, barley grinders hum, and young acolytes haul baskets filled with onions, garlic bulbs, and jugs of freshly brewed beer to the altar steps. At the heart of each celebration stands an immutable truth: the Anunnaki demand their due. Offerings of food and drink, grains, honey, and sweet wine, are not tokens, but vital sustenance that keeps the balance between mortal and divine. In the sprawling temple compounds, stewards maintain detailed accounts of these offerings. Inventory tablets recovered from and Sippar tally daily portions, over 1/5 liters of beer, 800 loaves, and dozens of sheep for just a single large festival. The administrative clay records are stacked by the thousands in rooms cooled by reed matting, revealing a temple economy as complex as any palace treasury. Temples, employing hundreds if not thousands of workers, become economic hubs. Storehouses overflow with tribute, and business contracts are inscribed in the name of the gods, not kings. Ritual unfolds with choreographed grace. Senior priests lead processions around the Ziggurat's terraces, swinging censers filled with cedar resin and singing hymns that have drifted unchanged on the Euphrates wind for generations. Offerings are set before golden or lapis idols. The gods eat by consuming the food's essence, leaving the physical remains for later distribution to temple workers and the poor. During the high feasts, the city's population might triple as rural families crowd inside shrine walls, seeking health, good harvests, or a propitious birth. Temples themselves are living engines. Their ovens bake every day. Their storehouses swell with annual tithes, and their fires never die. Across the entire riverland, the rhythm of ritual ties the working lives of tens of thousands to the unseen appetites of the Anunnaki. Each loaf, stamped or jug poured, reaffirms the ancient contract: humans serve, gods protect, and the city's fragile order is preserved another year beneath the baking sky and the watchful gaze of those invisible, demanding patrons. Nineveh, c. 1300 BC. Dusk settles across rows of low courtyards as scribes sharpen reeds and unroll clay tablets beneath flickering oil lamps. Within these walls, myth becomes immortal. Cuneiform records of the Anunnaki and their tangled deeds are pressed into wet clay and stored in the world's first great libraries. On shelves that stretch for meters, beside walls still echoing with hymn and rumor, tales like the Enuma Elish are copied and recopied, their syllables knotting the cosmos into story. Across Lower Mesopotamia, libraries in Nippur, Sippar, and Babylon compete to fill their shelves. Scribes, rarely numbering more than a few hundred in any city, labor ceaselessly, producing tens of thousands of tablets over generations. Archaeologists have counted nearly 25,000 individual pieces from Ashurbanipal's later collection alone. The Enuma Elish, written in Old Babylonian but updated for each new era, traces the fall and rise of the gods. Marduk's thunderous victory, the reluctant fealty of the Anunnaki, the creation of humanity, and the perpetual threat of cosmic chaos. On market days, priests recite these epics aloud in bustling temple courtyards. Everywhere from the great temples to modest village shrines, fragments of stories travel, embedded in lullabies, proverbs, school drills, and gossip. Cuneiform scribes ensure that even as dynasties shift and towns fall to dust, the stories of Anunnaki creation, rebellion, justice, and forgiveness survive as much in shared memory as in clay. Tablets are far from static relics. They pass from court to school, from priest to king. Variant tales, new heroes, regional gods, unexpected endings propagate across Sumer and Akkad, turning the Anunnaki from mere objects of ritual into central characters in a living literary network. Every stylus stroke renews their relevance as empires fade and rise, cementing the truth that in Mesopotamia, myth is as permanent as baked earth and as fleeting as the next breath. Anatolia to Persia, Sector 1200 and 600 BC, the winds of empire sweep Mesopotamian myth along their turbulent path. As Hittite chariots rumble toward Babylon and Hurrian settlers take up farming in the outlands, the story of the Anunnaki shifts outward, adopted, adapted, and renamed by conquerors and neighbors alike. On a trade route in Carchemish, a scribe from the Zagros Valley transcribes new names for old gods onto a tablet, smoothing out the jagged Sumerian syllables for foreign tongues. Hittite archives at Hattusa reveal entire, borrowed myths, where the Anunnaki mingle with storm gods and local underworld judges. The Hurrians, moving through the northern foothills, weave the Anunnaki into their own pantheon, a process archaeologists map through temple strata and continuity in ritual feasts. These transactions are not mere theft. Each new people bends the stories to their needs, blending gods for new laws, new cities, and new kinds of legitimacy. Persian priests at Ecbatana, building fire temples atop ancient ruins by the 6th century BC, echo rituals first performed at Eridu and Nippur, invoking reborn versions of the Anunnaki for fertility, justice, or safe passage through the world beyond. The mythic traffic is bidirectional. Egyptian magicians import Mesopotamian demon names for protective incantations, while Phoenician merchants tell tales of underworld gods that ring with echoes of Nergal and Ereshkigal. By 700 BC, the Anunnaki turned Anadoti populate Greek and Jewish lore, filtering even into the apocryphal Book of Enoch and scattered lines in Homer's epic verses. Even as the Ziggurats begin to show their age, the fame of Sumer's gods circles ever wider, their myths taught and retold in accents and alphabets foreign to the silt and reeds of the southern rivers. With every merchant caravan, imperial embassy, and exiled sage, the Anunnaki travel farther, reshaped at the crossroads between dust and glory. The boundaries between myth and reality blur as the world's first pantheon becomes a story shared and transformed by half of the known world. Nineveh, c. 650 BC, city of conquering kings and insatiable scribes, pulses under the shadow of Assur's iron-fisted rule. The Assyrian Empire, swelling to 3 million souls and stretching from Egypt to the Zagros, absorbs and repurposes every old tradition, including the Anunnaki's rites and myths. In the labyrinthine library of King Ashurbanipal, teams of scribes collect, recopy, and edit thousands of Sumerian and Akkadian tablets, preserving the voices and rituals of the ancestral gods for a brutal, bustling new age. Festival processions thread through the fortress city. Hundreds of priests and musicians parading beneath banners daubed with lion and bull. At the city's Ziggurat, rituals to the Anunnaki mix with fresh honors for Assyria's national deity Assur, whose cult now overshadows old Sumerian traditions even as it borrows their ceremonial power. In Ashur's name, conquerors legitimize their rule, yet prayers and formulas still summon Enlil, Ninhursag, and the rest as intermediaries, witnesses, and sacred ancestors. Ashurbanipal's famous library swells to more than 20,000 clay tablets. Scribes painstakingly preserve the Enuma Elish and Gilgamesh epics, copying them word for word, even as they reframe the ancient gods' importance. Some Anunnaki are demoted, reimagined as demons or underworld judges ripe for exorcism. Others blend with local deities, their names and rituals surviving as vestiges. The old cosmology adapts to the empire's rhythms: hard law, organized tribute, religious centralization, reflecting both the memory and the mastery of the imperial state. Yet, even as the Anunnaki's world shrinks in daily life, their essence clings tenaciously to libraries, legal formularies, and secretive temple nights. Priests invoke their names over coronation oil and treaty oaths. Exorcists scratch their symbols onto amulets and bricks. By the eve of Nineveh's sack in 612 BC, the old gods remain embedded, not only in palace ritual, but in the whispered stories of city dwellers, dim figures caught between memory and empire, twilight and glory. Seleucia, c. 200 BC. The moon rises over broken ziggurats as a sparse handful of priests tend flickering temple lamps in almost forgotten sanctuaries. The once thunderous hymns to the Anunnaki are now thin threads in a tapestry overrun by Greek gods and Hellenistic cults. Offering tables gather dust, and sacred grain rots in the corners, scavenged by foxes and birds. The last generation of devotee priests walk the temple courtyards in silence, keeping rituals alive for the gods of their ancestors even as the city's children drift toward the altars of Zeus or Artemis. Surveying the ruins, the aging sextons of the old religion record meager contributions. Offering jars now number in single digits, a fraction of the 3,000 gifts that once overflowed storerooms each Akitu festival. Overgrown canals and shattered walls, some toppled by Parthian siege, others eroded by time, testify to the physical fading of the Anunnaki's domain. Downriver at Babylon, Alexander's descendants quarry the last usable bricks from Marduk's temples, leaving only crumbling towers dotting the plain. Yet in the shadowed alcoves of abandoned ziggurats, rituals persist. A handful of initiates still pour libations, burn incense, and whisper the 100 sacred names into the dark, trustful that vestiges of the old gods might linger. Torches gutter and flare against the brick as lambs are led up broken steps, fewer each year, until the sacrifices too dwindle and end. By this time, the written language of Sumer is nearly lost, the final scribes no longer able to compose new hymns. The last offerings to the Anunnaki slip quietly into the night, the gods' presence fading to a memory, but never quite vanishing, as long as ruin, story, and ritual remain. Nimrud, spring 1849. The clank of pickaxes rings across a barren mound as British archaeologist Austin Henry Layard and his workmen uncover a hoard that reshapes history. A thick layer of dust gives way to shimmering bricks, and soon the sun glints off thousands of clay tablets, crammed in heaps within buried palace rooms. From this forgotten treasury, over 20,000 tablets emerge, many inscribed with the tales, prayers, and judgments of the Anunnaki, silent for 2 millennia, but now called back into modern understanding. As crates of these artifacts cross the desert to the Tigris and then on to London, the world's curiosity ignites. Layard's discoveries at Nimrud, and later Nineveh, spark a global wave of fascination. Museums rush to display the deciphered lines of cuneiform, revealing vivid accounts of floods, creation, and cosmic justice once pressed by Sumerian and Assyrian hands. Scholars like George Smith and Henry Rawlinson, laboring in the quiet rooms of the British Museum in the 1850s-70s, pieced together the first full translations of Gilgamesh, the Enuma Elish, and the tales of the Anunnaki. These rediscoveries electrify the Victorian imagination and the modern world beyond. Overnight, the Anunnaki, once almost erased by Greek and Persian conquest, become household names in scholarly circles and mass media alike. As more tablets are unearthed from Ur, Babylon, and Nippur, the myth unfurls anew. Schoolchildren learn of Gilgamesh and the floods, while academics reconstruct urban life and religion lost for 2,000 years. What slept in dust for centuries awakens in the glare of gaslight, reframing humanity's oldest dreams and giving the Anunnaki a second dawn. Modern world, 1987 and beyond. Night falls across the ruins of Uruk, where a tourist's flashlight flickers against age-pitted bricks, while above, satellites blink in low Earth orbit. The myth of the Anunnaki, far from vanishing, has found new hosts, filling the pages of science fiction, haunting the dialogue of documentary films, and animating conspiracy theories spun on midnight radio. H.P. Lovecraft's stories, penned in the 1920s, transform these ancient deities into eldritch beings. Decades later, television hosts tout the Anunnaki as cosmic engineers, seeding not barley, but civilization itself. Bookstores in Tokyo and Los Angeles stack shelves with speculative bestsellers. In 1968, Erich von Däniken's Chariots of the Gods explodes onto the scene, peddling the notion that the Anunnaki were actually advanced extraterrestrials, creators of Sumer's ziggurats, and perhaps humanity itself. Popular documentaries from the BBC to the History Channel weave ziggurat footage, star maps, and computer graphics into a tale where the prehistoric past hovers just out of sight, half fact, half phantom. YouTube channels in the 2000s, dappled with night vision tours and digital renderings, carry the myth into the 21st century, ensuring millions more drift to sleep, dreaming of the old gods' return. Even as archaeologists sort clay fragments under LED lights, the myth vibrates far beyond the academic. Children reimagine the Anunnaki in illustrated books. Artists sketch cosmic temples across game screens. Lobbyists cite ancient tablets in arguments about science and faith. Somewhere on the steppe, an amateur stargazer trains a cracked telescope over ruined walls, hoping for a sign, real or imagined, from those ancient creators of order and chaos. The Anunnaki endure, not just in memory, but as an evolving dream, undying, ever adapting, and always inviting the restless to join their watch beneath unfamiliar stars.